incredibly lucky to have our keynote speaker today, who is the preeminent expert in this program in Singapore. And our keynote speaker today is Professor Sakyong Fang, who will be presenting live via video conference all the way from Singapore. It's fairly early in the morning there. She's the Vice Provost and Celia Mo Chair Professor of Economics at Singapore Management University. She's written numerous books and articles on Singapore's unique housing system and is perhaps the world's top academic expert on it. She previously served as a board member for Singapore's Urban Redevelopment Authority, Land Transport Authority, Public Transport Council, and Competition Commission. Her presentation will walk through Singapore's housing model from top to bottom, including a historical look at its evolution. And at the end of her presentation, we'll have the opportunity to ask her questions, including those which are sent in via email to hawaiihousingconference@gmail.com. So to maximize her presentation, please welcome Professor Sakyong Fang.
Aloha, everyone. Good afternoon, and greetings from Singapore. Senator Stanley Chan has invited me to speak about Singapore's housing policies. He feels strongly that some aspects of our Singapore's housing model can be helpful in solving the housing shortage and housing affordability problems in Oahu. In Singapore, home ownership is not a dream, but a reality for 90% of resident households. How did Singapore achieve these outcomes? I will provide a broad understanding of our housing policies, 3 parts. First, I will explain our approach towards land use planning. Then I will explain the history of our housing policies, how we arrived at the present system after 60 years of experimentation. I will then highlight the economics behind our affordable housing model. Before I begin, some preliminary comparisons. In Singapore, we measure in Singapore dollars, hectares, and square meters. I have made the conversions to US dollars, acres, and square feet in some but not all of my slides. So these are the conversion rates to keep in mind. 1 Singapore dollar is about 74 US cents or 3/4. 1 hectare is about 2.5 acres, and 1 square meter about 10.8 square feet. I want also to provide some context by contrasting Singapore and Oahu. Singapore is a country of 5.7 million people, about 6 times Oahu's population. In terms of land area, it is less than half the size of Oahu. As a severely land-constrained city-state, all the physical spaces that are required for the normal functioning of a country have to fit into a city with a land area of 280 square miles. Despite the land constraint, the home ownership rate is 91%. However, unlike Oahu and much of the USA, where single-family houses are the most common house type, the most common house type is a high-rise HDB 4-room flat. HDB stands for our Housing and Development Board, the public agency responsible for public housing in Singapore. The 4-room flat is a 3-bedroom, 970 square foot flat. The median market price for a resale unit with no subsidy is about $300 or about $318 per square foot, about 4 years of median annual housing income. In Oahu, the house price to median household income ratio for single-family homes is about 11 and 6 for condominiums. We are talking about very different medium kinds of housing here. This is a picture of the Pinnacle at Duxton, a HDB housing project, 50 stories high, 1,800 housing units on 6 acres of land. It's built by the government for sale and not rental. The density of housing units of about 300 flats per acre is in contrast to Oahu's housing densities of 10 homes per acre for single family homes. In this example is at the extreme. This is the highest density HDB development right at the edge of the CBD. Densities are lower elsewhere. So how does Singapore do high-density mixed-use planning? Singapore has a total population of 5.7 million, of which 30% are foreigners, 70% residents. There are 3.5 million citizens and 500,000 permanent residents. This breakdown of the population is important because the nationality status of a person living in Singapore depends very much on the residential status, whether you're a citizen, PR, or foreigner. Planners have projected that the current population will increase to 6.9 million by 2030. Yet, there's very little room for expansion. While housing constitutes 14% of the land, 40% of land is reserved for reservoirs, military use, gateways, our airports and ports, and industry and commerce. Singapore has been levelling hills and using imported landfill to enlarge its land area, which has increased by 25% from the 1960s to now. So every year I have to check what our land area is to be sure. We have no choice but to go high density. So as you can see from the breakdown of our housing stock, 95% of Singapore's housing comprise high-rise condominiums and HDB apartments. HDB is a government agency. It has built more than 1 million units of housing since 1960 when it was established. The Urban Redevelopment Authority, or URA for short, is Singapore's land use planning agency. In the 1950s, the government inherited a master plan from the British colonial government that was modeled after the Greater London Plan. It has restrictive British planning norms and processes. However, this was ill-suited for rapid development. So in 1959, when we had self-government, the elected government then provided for 5-yearly updates and exemption of public sector projects. In 1964, legislation was passed for how changes to the master plan would be treated. A development charge would be levied on private landowners for approved changes to land use or intensity of use. So when the land value is expected to change because of a change to the master plan zoning or density, the government imposes a development charge on the project to recoup some of the gains in land value. So the current development charge rate is 70%. That is, for the increment in land value, 70% is taxed by the government. A long-term concept plan, which guided public sector projects, was completed in 1971. In the 1990s, we had radical change to our land use planning regime. The master plan, instead of being a record of existing land use, became a forward-looking plan. It takes reference from the revised concept plan and contains the urban planner's proposals to guide the comprehensive development or redevelopment for each area. A form of forward guidance on what kind of changes will be permitted. Planners review the concept plan every 10 years, the master plan every 5 years. This allows land use planning to be aligned with changes in the economic strategy and the projected needs of the population. As the master planner and developer for HDB towns, HDB takes a comprehensive approach in developing entire towns, guided by a few principles. HDB plans for self-sufficiency. HDB towns are developed as total living environments to meet people's daily needs. Each town is reasonably self-sufficient. In addition to housing, residents are well served by shops, schools, and social and recreational facilities. HDB plans for connectivity together with the Land Transport Planning Agency. HDB towns are served by, at present, 200 kilometers of mass rapid transit lines and comprehensive highways and roads. HDB uses a checkerboard concept. By this, we mean that low-intensity land uses, such as parks and schools, are juxtaposed with high-rise residential developments to achieve visual and spatial relief in our high-density environment. HDB uses 3 scales in its planning. Facilities and amenities are planned according to these 3 different levels of scale. At the heart of each town is a town center, a key commercial activity hub. Around the town center are smaller neighborhoods of 4,000 to 6,000 units, each with its own shops, schools, and parks. Each neighborhood further comprises precincts of about 400 to 800 units, served by a local shop cluster, precinct facilities such as playgrounds and greenery. This is a map of Singapore showing the location of 24 HDB towns. To better illustrate HDB's town planning principles, I will zoom in on Tampines here, which is on the east and close to the Changi Airport. This is the master plan that has just been released, the 2019 master plan for Tampines town. Most of the land here in Tampines is for HDB housing. Here you can see that there's green space provision, there's a reservoir and there's a quarry space. And the town center is served by MRT, 2 lines here, the east-west line, the downtown line. And this town center here is the heart center of the town. You can see these purple plots here scattered around Tampines. These are the sites for government land sales. They have been sold to the private developers for development of housing, commercial, and retail space. Senator Stanley sent me a question last week. Who decides what amenities are part of any given HDB project? The answer is both the public and private sectors. And let me zoom in on the Tampines Town Centre, which you saw earlier, to explain how it happens. The purple areas here in the town centre are retail and commercial developments on land that's been sold under the government land sales program. These are mainly office spaces. These are the malls that have been sold for development. And I want to zoom in on Tampines Mall here and on this area here, which we call our Tampines Hub. Tampines Mall is one of 3 large shopping malls in Tampines Town Centre. It is a modern shopping mall, as you can see, developed and managed entirely by the private sector. The private sector developer bids successfully for the site to develop, decides how the mall is built, and the REIT management decides on what kind of amenities to provide in these spaces. The same with the commercial developments at the town centre. Tampines Hub, which is also walking distance to the MRT station just across the road, is developed as a community space by multiple government agencies. It houses facilities and amenities that are under the charge of various ministries: the sports facilities, stadiums, theatres, the regional library, community clubs, health clinics, elder care centre, as well as restaurants, hawker centres, and retail shops. So this is how the public and the private sector both determine what amenities are provided in the HDB town. Well, before the HDB came along, Singapore housing was already predominantly mixed use. On your left, you can see the kind of typical shop houses that we had before and which still exists as conservation property. This is near Chinatown. So this is the Asian shop house. Families live on the upper levels, and the ground floor is for commercial use. Singaporeans are therefore very used to the convenience of, going downstairs for their daily needs. HDB developments thus incorporated this mixed-use concept into their town planning. On the right, you see a town centre development that was built in the 1970s. So there are also downstairs shops for the high-rise HDB developments in the precincts. So you need something, you need anything, a haircut, fruits, etc., just walk downstairs, including for your daily meals. Hawker food is integral to life in Singapore. In the old days, these were literally hawkers, as in pushcarts parked on streets and in open air seating. Each store was specialized in one cuisine, even one dish, and the competition is intense. I think the closest US equivalent would be the food trucks. But when HDB came along, it relocated the street hawkers into cooked food centers, as you can see on the right. So they're centralized, localized in one area, and you walk along down the aisle of each hawker center to decide what food you want to have. But we still call them hawker centers. There are about over 100 hawker centers in HDB towns and estates. These are managed for food hygiene standards by the National Environment Agency. And the agency conducts monthly tenders for vacant stores, specifying the category that the store is for, such as drinks, cut fruits, Malay, Indian, or no restrictions. And depending on the location and store category, the successful tender bid can range from $1 for a month to a few thousand. So this exercise is quite laborious for the agency and has now been experimenting with different models of hawker centers operated by not-for-profit organizations. There are still some noises about how this is being run, but we'll see how it evolves. In newer developments, our hawker centers are kind of integrated into this all-in-one developments, kind of all-in-one villages where there are retail shops, elder care centers, community plazas, right next to housing apartments and right next to MRT stations. This is a typical HDB development. Well, this is another example of high-density mixed-use on 99-year lease site. Orchard Residence at Ion Orchard, right next to the Orchard MRT station, and Orchard Road is Singapore's prime shopping district. The co-founder of Facebook, Jackie Chan, are some of the famous personalities who own units there. The land for retail and housing in this location at the junction of Orchard and Scott's is the most expensive in Singapore. And the price tag for an apartment here is in excess of $2,000 per square foot, multiple times the medium per square foot price of a 4-room HDB flat. And between the medium and the high end lies an entire spectrum of housing developments. To build an inclusive society, HDB planning also integrates different income groups in its estates and towns. There is high correlation between income and housing size in the HDB sector. And this is a distribution of housing types at the national level. On the left, 4 million population lives in different kinds of housing types distributed in this manner. But if you look at Burgos now, which is a typical HDB town, this is the distribution at Burgos. Blocks of different flat sizes are planned in the same neighborhood. And within each block, there's also a mixing of flat types. Private housing developments are also located within HDB estates. So the result is that while there are low-income households in Singapore, there are no low-income neighborhoods. Well, Lenny asked me if I know of wealthy households who live in HDB towns. To answer his question, I checked the data on the highest income households. Found that amongst the top income earners in Singapore, 37% of them live in the HDB sector. The rest are in the private condos and in landed housing. But if you look at the medium income households, the majority would be in the HDB sector. Well, our most famous HDB dweller is undoubtedly our country's president. President Halimah, a lawyer by training, lived in a HDB flat throughout her tenure as Member of Parliament and Speaker of Parliament. She only left the HDB sector reluctantly, soon after becoming the president, as the security detail became too challenging. She now lives in that's the president's official residence and now her current private home. Planners also try to plan away racial segregation. Singapore is a multiracial city-state and racially segregated neighborhoods were common in the 1960s. From the 1970s, HDB mixed different races in the new housing estates when allocating flats. However, the planners did not foresee that resegregation would re-emerge with the deregulation of the resale market. When the trend of racial regrouping to the resale market became evident by the 1980s, government intervened with race quotas. The race quota for say, the Chinese in a neighborhood is 84%. The bloc has a higher quota. For the Malays, it's 22%. So there's and for the Indians, 12%. So when the Chinese limit has been reached in the block or neighborhood, a Malay seller is required to sell to another Malay household to prevent the entire neighborhood from becoming Chinese. When the Malay quota has been reached, a Chinese or Indian seller is required to sell to another household of the same race. As the resale market has been deregulated to allow non-citizens to buy and rent, it means only permanent residents to buy, but rental is permitted to foreigners, quotas have also been introduced for permanent residents and for non-citizen tenants at the neighborhood level and at the block level. There's a great deal of interest from many countries on how Singapore plans affordable housing. The HDB hosts numerous visits from delegations from all over the world. I understand the delegation from Hawaii visited a few months ago. In 2003, HDB's 3,000 strong building and development division was reorganized into a separate entity. The entity has now evolved into Sabana Jurong. It is a company owned by the Singapore government's investment holding company, Temasek Holding. Sabana Jurong is involved in large-scale, complex urban development projects in several Asian countries. It has 16,000 employees in offices located in 120 cities and 40 countries. So HDB's planning expertise in high-density mixed-use planning has thus been exported to other cities for Sabana Jurong. So I've come to the end of my first part of my presentation on planning, and I will now go on to look at a brief history of housing policies. How did we arrive at this present day of housing affordability? Well, all that planning that you heard about in the first part may appear socialistic. But planners and policymakers have a deep respect for markets and competition in Singapore. This year, the World Economic Forum in its Global Competitive Report ranked Singapore as the most competitive nation in the world, overtaking the US. Singapore's pragmatic approach to policy generally may be described as a mechanism design or market design approach. What do I mean? Professor Eric Muskin of Harvard University, who won a Nobel Prize for Market Design, describes market design as the reverse engineering part of economics. To quote Professor Muskin, we begin by identifying the desired outcomes or social goals. We then ask whether or not an appropriate institution or mechanism could be designed to attain the goal. If the answer is yes, then we want to know what form that mechanism might take. Who determines social goals? In a democratic society, it is our elected politicians who provide the leadership to steer society. Singapore has had 3 prime ministers since the first elections were held in 1959. Our founding Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, led the country to merger with Malaysia in 1963 and independence in 1965. We separated from the Malaysian Federation and became a republic. Second Prime Minister is Mr. Goh Chok Tong on your left, and the current Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong. So each Prime Minister had a different set of housing challenges and different housing goals over the decades as incomes increased and Singapore developed from a colonial city into a global city. The 1950s and 1960s was a period of decolonization, overcoming challenges of nation building. In the 1960s, Singapore's CBD had many similarities with other British colonial cities. The government buildings at the center, General Post Office, the Cricket Club, Anglican Church, the Commercial District, etc. The town planning provided for separate residential districts for different races. This was mainly Chinese area that you see here. So there was a critical housing crisis after World War II. Families were crowded into shop houses without modern sanitation, and it's in a central town area. This is what life looked like. And there were squatter settlements and informal housing that was common in rural areas. So this was the current state of housing in the 1960s. The first elected government in 1959 promised to provide decent homes equipped with modern amenities to all those who needed them. To do that, it established the Housing and Development Board in 1960 to clear and redevelop slums and to build housing. We said that the founding Prime Minister and his team laid the foundations for property-owning democracy. As a lawyer, he realized the need for legislative reform to change the status quo. The government took on the role of land use planner and real estate developer. Legislative changes were made to land ownership rights. And the pension fund and the CPF was modified. The Central Provident Fund was modified into a housing provident fund. I'll go into details of this later. The HDB, established in 1960, is only present in a Singapore housing context. It has multiple roles. It's a town planner and master developer, plans and develops towns and estates. It's responsible for land acquisition and resettlement. And as a housing developer, it provides quality and affordable housing for the population. It plans and provides parking, commercial and recreational spaces, and it's also a housing bank. It provides mortgage loans for the properties it sells and loan servicing as well, and provides these buyback options on reverse mortgage for elderly household. Agent for government land sales, and currently it has a staff strength of over 5,000 employees. Where Singapore's land policies are concerned, I want to take a slight detour to introduce the ideas of Henry George, an American economist who was born in Philadelphia, worked in San Francisco, and later ran for election as a candidate for mayor of New York City. He liked his ideas. His 1879 book, Progress and Poverty, became a bestseller on both sides of the Atlantic in the 1890s. The subtitle provides you an idea of his concerns, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depression, an increase of want, an increase of wealth, basically inequality. What is the remedy? Henry George lived and worked in San Francisco. And during his time, he was faced with the problem of unaffordable housing for the middle and low-income households. The rapid development of cities in 19th century America caused substantial increases in land prices. While urban land prices are determined by population growth, by demand, accessibility to other activities, and the potential for high-density developments. Public investments in roads, transit, increased accessibility, increasing in turn the demand for urban land, leading to rapid increases in land prices. This rapid increase in real estate prices had large wealth and income redistribution effects. Homeowners, landowners, and speculators who had purchased housing and land earlier enjoyed huge windfall gains, and George felt that this wasn't right. But unlike Marx, George held nothing against capitalists, who in his view took entrepreneurial risks and made investments that benefited the community. His grouse was against land speculators. In his view, did nothing to justify the unearned increase in land values. As the economy grew and land values increased, this led to expectations for future high price increases, resulting in speculative bubbles. The irrational exuberance that followed were inevitably crushed, swapping out vast amounts of asset values. This creates yet another set of winners and losers, which may not be exactly matching the first set of winners and losers. So what was George's remedy? that we must make land common property. Quote, to effect this value, this capture of land value, it did consider that governments could nationalize land and lease it out. However, he felt that a more workable solution was to introduce a very high land value tax on the annual value of unimproved land held as private property. How high should this tax be? George proposed 100% land rent tax, which he called the single tax. Well, Singapore has been described as the most Georgian place on earth. However, we did not agree with this mechanism of single land tax. We used different mechanisms. In 1964, the minimum charge legislation was passed to allow the government to recoup 70% of any land value increment rising from a change to master plan or existing use. In 1965, when Singapore was, we were booted out of Malaysia, and we had to have our own constitution, the Parliament adopted all the provisions of the Malaysian constitution, with one exception: the right to acquire adequate compensation in the event of compulsory land acquisition. The government has the right to acquire private property in Singapore, and the Land Acquisition Act that was passed in 1966 gave the state and its agencies broad powers to acquire land for any public purpose without appeal to the courts. And in 1973, because there were so many disputes over the amount of compensation that should be paid when the government acquired land, amendment to the Land Acquisition Act fixed compensations independent of market conditions. So for 34 years, compensations for acquired land were not at current market values, but at prices prevailing on a prescribed statutory date in the past. The government's view was that there was no reason why private landowners should profit from an increase in land value brought about by economic development, the infrastructure paid for public funds. Well, we have moved quite a bit since from those days, and in 2007, compensation has been made at market rates. But today, the state ownership of land, I think, is above 90%. So with land made available for development, industrial estates and HDB towns, economic growth took off. This is an award-winning Pongo town that was formerly farmland. The government lifted rent control in the CBD, resettled the population from the central area in order to allow development of commercial buildings for an international financial center. And still see the colonial government buildings. Here is the General Post Office, Parliament House, and the Padang and Cricket Club here. Well, today, HDB houses 80% of the resident population. The proportion was actually higher in the 1980s. Has been coming down. All of decent housing has already been achieved by the late 1980s. Now, over 90% of the HDB flats are sold rather than rented to tenants. So, another goal, therefore, was that of a home-owning society, considered essential for social and political stability. Enable low-income households to afford to own their homes. The government transformed the CPF, the Central Provident Fund, meant for retirement financing, into a Housing Provident Fund in 1968. If you look at this part here, this is the employees and employers. You have to make substantial compulsory contributions to the Central Provident Fund. And the CPF savings can only be used for housing, medical expenses, education, but else has to be kept there until retirement. It's evolved to a very complicated scheme. The CPF here can make down payments on behalf of landowners, of homeowners to the HDB, when the HDB sells flats to these households. So it's a HDB that provides housing grants and mortgage loans to the households. But it is mortgage loans are paid out from their CPF accounts. This framework basically provides for minimal default risk as long as the households remain employed. And as CPF savings here cannot be used for rental payment, this mortgage design basically force households to prefer to own rather than rent, because rental payments come out of your pocket, whereas mortgage payments can be come out of your compulsory savings in the Central Provident Fund. This mortgage design basically mobilized domestic savings on a nationwide basis and made home ownership default choice for households. How is the HDB funded? It receives land and grants, also loans from the government to fund its various. The loans are to fund the mortgage provision of mortgage loans. On the CPF, the deposit in CPF goes towards the purchase of government bonds, and these are invested by our sovereign wealth funds. Later on in the process, commercial banks came into the picture and were also allowed to provide mortgage loans to those buying HDB flats. This is a much simpler diagram than this one. Okay. The Affordable Housing Institute is based in Boston and which does affordable housing for the Global South countries, has a rather neat diagram of the 16 links that you need to deliver affordable home ownership. On the supply side, it starts with land, and then you need infrastructure, site layout, design, risk assumption, construction, offtake, and then the management of the properties. On the demand side, in housing finance, the households who want to purchase housing has to go for eligibility checks, apply for housing loans, receive subsidies any. There's credit underwriting, loan closing, funding, loan servicing, enforcement. So the value chain or ecosystem is a fairly complex one. And each of these links here will have a local equivalent in Hawaii. So if any links in this value chain is not working, such as land, is not available, or there's no credit underwriting, then the chain is broken. And the result is a lack of affordable housing. So under this ecosystem analysis, you can see how the HDB CPF framework basically integrated and simplified the entire value chain by having the HDB responsible for 15 of the links here in this chain, and the CPF providing the funding. EPF contribution rates increased soon after savings were allowed for housing mortgage payments. As you can see, it went up. The contribution rates went up from 5% for employees and employers to up to 25% for employers and employees. It's 50% total. And we had a very bad recession in the 1980s, and the rates came down because, contribution rates do drive up wage costs. And now the rates have stabilized at 20% contribution for employers and 17% for employees. So with such a scheme in place, it's not surprising that the home ownership rate increased rapidly. By 1990, it had risen to 87%. So this increase corresponded with the HDB building program, where 87% of HDB of residents were living in HDB flats by 1990. So this was the situation that Mr. Goh Chok Tong, our second Prime Minister from 1990 to 2004, inherited. During Mr. Goh's watch, you must remember 1990s was a period when Britain was under Margaret Thatcher, and privatization became a buzzword in the 1980s and early 90s. So under the Goh Chok Tong government, privatization and deregulation markets took place. The demand side housing grants, subsidies were introduced, and there were asset enhancement policies through the HDB upgrading. Let me elaborate on privatization and deregulation. So in the 1990s, bank control was phased out completely. The HDB resale market was deregulated, and there was radical changes to land use master plan, from passive updating or permitted land use to from passive updating of current land use and approved land use to permitted land use intensities. And then we also launched the Executive Condominium Scheme, a PPP housing scheme. Legislation was amended to remove gridlock and facilitate en bloc sale of private developments for redevelopment. And government land sales and PPs took off. This is what happened when the HDB resale market was deregulated. I see that in early 1990s, the blue line there is the private property price index. The green line is our HDB resale price index, which only started in 1990. That's the consumer price index. And as you can see, the HDB resale sector prices were basically flat up to 1992 before deregulation. And in 1992, during this period, there were a number of measures that were instituted. The income ceilings were removed for resale flats so that anyone could buy a resale flat without income ceiling restrictions. Before that, the HDB income ceilings also applied to resale flats. And then the permanent residents were allowed to buy resale flats. And then the financing situations also changed to allow loans to be made based on market values of resale flats rather than on posted values. So the resale financing schemes were also changed for resale HDB flats. And as a result of all this deregulation, you can see that resale prices actually shot up by multiple times during the early part of 1990s. And then we had the Asian financial crisis, it crashed, and then it has been moving along this line until the global financial crisis period when asset prices took off in the rest of the world. So this is what happened when we deregulated the resale market. As for government land sales and PPPs, the government land sales program, remember now that the government owns 100% of land. The government releases lands for sale every 6 months. There's a confirmed list where the sites will be put out for sale, and there is a reserve list where it should be activated only when developers indicate interest to make a bid. And the government will regulate this land development. There are detailed planning regulations, zoning regulations, and sales conditions such as when the project must be completed and the penalties for not in time completion. And all government land sale sites are sold at no more than 99 years to private developers. Most of the sites are sold to closed tender, and the successful bidder then designs and builds developments while abiding by planning rules and regulations. So various methods of sales are used. There's a single-use site, which is say this is for residential development, which is relatively straightforward. There are white sites that provide flexibility for a developer to decide the optimal mix of users as they understand market needs better. There's a fixed price, best proposal method, which is used for the Marina Bay Sands development. Then there's 2 envelope tenders that give more emphasis to the concept, design concept, with the first shortlisting round based on the merit of the proposal, and the second envelope based on price. And we have large-scale integrated developments that give more discretion to private developers on the optimal mix and may allow the timing of the development to be responsive to market demand. And this is also a kind of form of risk sharing. The Urban Redevelopment Authority has now been experimenting with a request for master plan proposals that give the private sector the opportunity to provide inputs for master plans of entire regions. Well, Mr. Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister, he became Prime Minister from 2004 and inherited a different set of challenges to successes. We had to deal with moving the country towards becoming a global city. At the same time, the Western population is aging. There's now a lot more consciousness about equality, and there are now foreign investors and real estate speculators who want to invest in Singapore's real estate. And we have to deal with the aging housing stock as well. So housing schemes were put in place for the elderly, asset-rich but cash-poor households to release equity from their housing. HDB put in place a lease buyback scheme where the HDB buys back the tail end of the lease from senior households and provides annuity for their retirement needs. There's a silver housing bonus for households to right-size or downsize their housing. And HDB has begun building this two-room flexi flats. Two-room HDB flat. Flexi means flexi lease. The lease of the flat can range from 20 years to 99 years, depending on the needs of the buyer. And it's allowed ground renting or subletting of existing rooms or the entire flat for the households. The housing grants were also better calibrated, and households that are below the median household income now enjoy grants when they buy housing that is very much dependent on their household income. It's now known as an enhanced housing grant. To prevent a housing bubble from developing, after the 2009, when interest rates became very, very low, and were faced with these problems of foreign investors coming to Singapore to buy real estate, the government has devised numerous instruments to curb house price increases. So there are seller stamp duties of 0% to 16%, depending on the holding period. So if a buyer buys a property and sells it within 4 years, he's subject to the seller stamp duty. They put in place loan-to-value ratio caps on loans from banks. There's a maximum loan tenure requirement. Buyer stamp duties range from 0% to 25%. So this is a great discouragement to investors. There's a total debt service ratio cap of 60% and mortgage service ratio caps of 30%. So these measures have been put in place only the last 10 years. And as you can see, post 2009, when housing prices started climbing, the government put in place, tried to intervene at all these various points to cool down the market. And measures became stricter and stricter over time. Eventually, it only succeeded in stabilizing and preventing house prices from going up after multiple rounds of cooling measures. And to say that success in stabilizing the housing market came about only in 2014. But in 2017, when it felt that prices were creeping up again, there's another round of cooling measure. You can say that the government watches the housing market and intervenes as appropriate to change the variables involved in all the instruments in order to bring about a desired level of house prices. This is for the private housing sector. Okay, so these are some of the issues that we face in the housing sector. And I will now look at the economics of affordable housing in Singapore. How does the economics work to achieve sustainable, affordable housing? There are many factors at play here. One is a list of F's here. The focus, affordability, fiscal sustainability, the financial stability of the housing finance system, which I explained using the CPF HDB framework. The HDB has many friends. It's a multi-agency effort involving the urban land use planners, the land transport planners, utilities provider. The HDB functions are very clear, but it's evolved over the 60 years of experimentation. Uses public procurement extensively, the PPPs. And in terms of the future, the planning is for the entire life cycle of the project. There are after sales concerns and lease expiry. What are the ownership rights after sale? How is household mobility affected? And the continuously adapt to the unexpected. So I'm going to focus only on the red areas that are highlighted from Senator Stanley's question. I understand that those are his concerns. So in terms of focus on affordable housing, we find that there's a lot of cross-subsidization going on within the housing sector. Foreigners and PRs, citizen investors, pay the market price plus additional buyer stamp duty for private housing. First-time homeowners from high-income citizen households don't qualify for HDB housing, pay the market price for private housing and HDB resale flats without the stamp duties. Eligible first-time homeowners can buy direct from the HDB at subsidized prices. The eligible second-time homeowners buy direct from the HDB as well. There's two bites to the cherry, but they pay a resale levy when they do that. And HDB provides housing grants that vary with household income. So we are doing actually third-degree price discrimination here. The same unit sells for different prices, net of housing grants, to households with different income levels. So the eligibility conditions for HDBs call them built-to-order flats. There's a citizenship requirement, at least one citizen applicant, at least one other citizen or permanent resident. This would usually be a couple. Age must be at least 21 years old. And the income ceiling must be within the set ceiling for the flat if you intend to buy. You must not own any property within the last 30 months. Cannot invest in private residential property after application until after the 5-year minimum occupancy period, and must not have bought a new HDB flat before or have only bought one of these properties. So the second time chance is allowed for applicants. So if you look at our way we segment the housing market in order to achieve housing affordability for everyone, even for those with income below 1,500, you see what is going on here. The HDB public rental scheme, which is a very small scheme, incomes less than 1,500. To buy a new 5-room HDB flat is a monthly income in Sing dollars. Income is less than 6,000. To buy a new 3-room HDB flat below 7,000 or below 14,000 if it's in an area closer to town, where prices are therefore higher. For the 4-room and larger HDB flats, it's 14,000. Remember that the median monthly household income is about 9,000. The HDB sector actually caters to more than 80-90% of first-time homeowners. To buy a new exact condominium, the income is less than 16,000. And for all these schemes, permanent residents are not eligible, foreigners are not eligible. To buy a resale HDB flat, there's no income ceiling. A permanent resident must have achieved the residency status for a minimum number of years. Foreigners are not eligible to be in the HDB resale sector. For rental, well, it's a deregulated market for rental for all the sectors and for everyone, but you can see Singaporeans mostly own. To buy private apartments and condominiums, there's additional buyer stamp duty, 0 for first-time property owners, 12% for second-time property owners, 15% for additional properties. It's ready to discourage property investments. For permanent residents, 5% for the first property, 15% for additional properties. And for foreigners, it's a 20% stamp duty on purchase. And foreigners are not eligible to buy private landed properties, including permanent residents, unless with the explicit permission of the Minister for Law. So you can see that basically the rich and wealthy are kept out of the entire HDB, and foreigners are kept out of most of the HDB sector. So what is the process to buy a HDB flat? Most of the graduates from university who have decided on to get married after they graduate. I mean, the joke in Singapore is people don't ask whether, would you like to marry me? They ask, would you like to apply for a HDB flat with me? So the first step is check eligibility for HDB flats. the flat types, housing grants eligible for, the mortgage loan amounts, and this can all be done on the HDB website. And to stay alert for news of HDB launches, HDB makes this announcement about 6 months ahead of the launch, and usually 2 to 3 sites are launched at the same time. The interested applicant selects location, submits the application, all done online. And the submission of application is subject to checks on verified income, citizenship status, etc. The HDB updates the status of the project and application. Whether the applicant has been successful, because a ballot takes place for different categories, whether it is for upgraders, first-timers, senior citizens, etc. So if successful, the invitation to choose a unit comes later, and the choice is from HDB plans. Sign the lease agreement, and then the project goes ahead and collect keys, usually 3 years from the time of the launch. So these are the kind of flats that are available. 2-room flat, 3-room flats, about 200 square feet. And the prices there are, the top price is I call the sticker price, the midpoint sticker prices from HDB's annual report. About 83 per square foot, 214 per square foot. But after grants, I'm using the midpoint there, it comes down very substantially. For a 2-room flat, 40 square feet, after grants, the price could be $64 per square feet. 3-room flat, $136 per square feet. And then you have the HDB 4-room flat, HDB 5-room flat, with different levels of grants leading to a price after grant that is much closer to the asking price. So the grant subsidies are much lower for high-income households who typically will apply for the larger flat types. So given that I estimated the construction costs for HDB to be around $140 US dollars per square foot, you can see that the after grant price is actually a subsidized price. The construct is lower than the construction cost. So the smaller room types are being sold at a price that is lower than the construction cost, not to mention land costs. And the higher flat types are being sold at prices that are above construction costs. So they are paying a positive price for the land component of the developments. So you can see that the pricing depends on flat types and on household income. The housing grants to buy a built-to-order flat, as I mentioned, depends on, the grant amount depends on household income. It's finely calibrated numerous categories of household income. And the maximum amount is $80,000 for household incomes below $1,500 per month. The grants are also available for the resale flat as well. So that those who do not want to wait for a BTO flat can buy on the resale market and be able to enjoy the resale grants. So proximity housing grant here refers to those who buy a property that is close to their parents' housing, and the government would incentivize that by providing a higher grant amount. A family grant is also available for the executive condominium scheme applicants. So if you look at the financing of the HDB, this is from its latest annual report, the cost of sales comes up to $6 billion, and the sales proceeds are $4.7 billion, which means that the HDB makes a loss on the sales, which records is $1.3 billion. The net deficit, therefore, before government grants is about $2 billion. And HDB, under the HDB Act, all its deficits are actually covered by the government. The government grant for the year is $2 billion. In addition, the government provides CPF housing grants to HDB home buyers. But this $6 billion in terms of cost of sales is inclusive of the HDB purchase of land from the Singapore Land Authority. And in 2018-19, it paid $3 billion, the Singapore Land Authority, to buy land from the authority. So if you look at the numbers there, net of cost of sale 6 billion, purchase of land 3 billion, you get basically cost of construction and all other costs at 3 billion. And the sales proceeds are 4.7 billion. So if without the land sales component, the HDB would not be facing a deficit. And now I want to zero in on the executive condo scheme, which is a PPP scheme for that develops condominiums for citizens only. The household monthly income is 60,000 Sing dollars, is about 12,000 US per month in terms of monthly income. There's also a minimum occupancy period requirement, 5 years. And in the 5th to 10th year of the development, resale is permitted, but the buyer must be a Singaporean or a permanent resident. After the 10th year, it's considered equivalent of private property, and it becomes private property in the sense that it can be sold to a foreigner as well. And since the scheme was launched in the 1990s, there's now comprises about 9% of private housing development. The developments that have been built earlier has already been so-called privatized. They are not considered private properties. The scheme is now ongoing. As you can see, 2019 we have had 1 site. 2018 there were 3 sites that were put out, and these are usually handled by the HDB. And as you can see, the land area is specified. It's in the 99 year. There is a gross area permitted, minimum gross area, and then these are successful tender amounts for each of these sites that are recorded. For the most recent sale, for example, you have estimated housing units 385, somewhere in Sembawang, which is about 20 km away from the city centre. And the equivalent of the land price is actually about $420 per square foot in terms of average land price for the units being sold there. So you can see that actually, the land price that different categories of household would pay would differ very much on their household income and affordability to pay for housing. So the government makes good revenue from land sales. As you can see, in 2017, land sales receipts were 15.8 billion, which comprised about 15% of the total receipts of the government. In 2018, it's in that range. So about 15% of the government's revenue coming from land sales receipts. The land sale receipts do not, however, go into the operating budget of the government. The sales of land here, in 2017, 12% of the reserves, the receipts are out into the reserves. And these reserves are invested by our sovereign wealth funds, the Government Investment Corporation of Singapore, and the investment incomes come back into the Singapore government's investment interest income contributions from sovereign wealth funds, which was about 17% of its budget in 2017. So you can see that there are numerous items in the government's revenues that are actually land related. And estimated for 2017, about 50% of its receipts are actually land related. And that allows the government to actually, that allows for our income taxes and a relatively low level and competitive level of 17% profits. So after sales, what happens is another aspect of success of HDB in that there's a lot of attention paid to maintaining asset values of the properties after they are sold. The HDB properties are managed by 16 town councils. These are led by members of parliament, and they are responsible for the day-to-day operations, managing the common property of HDB residential flats and commercial property within the town. They have they're in charge of routine repairs, servicing and maintenance, the horticultural conservancy, cleaning works, town improvement and upgrading works. They also, of course, the cyclical maintenance works. So if you see the town council funds, they receive funds from residents and commercial operators monthly charges. We also receive grants from the government. It's basically a subsidized operation. And then the town council is in charge of this short-term routine expenses, operating funds, and they also set aside funds for cyclical maintenance, so repainting and renewal, replacement of pumps, systems, etc. And also for lift upgrading works. So how much do HDB residents pay for this monthly maintenance? You can see that owners pay based on the type of flat, and this is a typical monthly payment for to the town council. The foreign flat dweller will pay $62, for example. And at the same time, the government also provides grants to the town councils depending on the flat type and also on the age of the flats, because older flats require higher levels of maintenance. And also, in terms of the annual budget, the government makes rebates, a kind of transfer payments to citizens based on the type of HDB flats that they live in. For example, in 2019, the rebates based on citizenship, house HDB type was like 3.5 months of monthly service and conservancy charges, which means that the government will waive 3.5 months of these charges for one room type, two room type, etc. And find a form of transfer payment based on house type. The monthly car park charges are quite affordable, $80, or $110 if it's a sheltered car park. And this is just to give an indication of the property tax rates per year that HDB dwellers pay. And because we have $8,000, our property tax is based on annual value, and there's an $8,000 exemption. You find that people who live in 1, 2, and 3 flats hardly pay no or very low amounts of property tax. And there's continuous upgrading programs that are also subsidized by the government. The government has provided for a home improvement program where it provides a major upgrading twice to HDB flats at the 30-year mark and at the 60 to 70-year mark. Most of the developments are not at 60 to 70-year mark yet. So the HDB will select the precincts for upgrading, and at least 75% of blocks household vote yes for the upgrading goes ahead. So the kind of upgrading works for the flats would be essential improvements such as falling concrete, upgrading electrical load. These are fully paid by the government, and the optional improvements to the flat, upgrading bathrooms, new doors, etc., subsidized up to 95%. And for senior citizens, there are elderly friendly fittings, slip resistance, bathroom floor tiles, etc., again subsidized up to 95%. So the government has actually done this for more than nearly 500,000 HDB flats, round one of improvements, and has promised a round two of improvements at the 70-year mark. So this is an example of upgrading under a previous scheme where before upgrading the flat looked like this, and after upgrading, features are added to improve the flat. Estate renewal, in addition to the home improvement program, we have neighborhood renewal programs that are fully funded by the government. The lift upgrading and lift replacement is co-funded by the government and the town council. So what happens when a 99-year lease expires? That was another question got, and most of the 99-year lease has not expired since we are a country that is less than 60 years old. But what has been happening is that leases has been renewed even before they expire. So this would be the HDB selective and block redevelopment program. It is compulsory. The government gives notice to the owner to acquire a flat, the whole block. It pays the owners the market rate. It gives the owner the option to move to a new subsidized flat close by with a fresh 99-year lease. And of course, people are extremely delighted, if you don't mind the disruption, to be given a new flat to fresh 99-year leases under the selective en bloc redevelopment scheme. And the process takes a few years, and about 81 sites have gone under selective en bloc redevelopment. And of course, the expectations then are that this is going to continue to happen, but I think the government has put a stop to that kind of expectations, and that there will only be for sites with the potential for higher density redevelopment to take place. So I think in 2018, last year, the Prime Minister announced another scheme, a voluntary early redevelopment scheme, that the government will buy back the flats that are 70 years old or more, subject to a resident's vote. So if the development is 70 years old or more, and the residents vote for the government to buy back the flats, the government will do so and redevelop the area. So the residents receive compensation, but the terms will be less than the selective block redevelopment scheme. The details of the schemes, the voluntary early redevelopment scheme has not been announced yet, but it's being studied by the government, and so will not begin for another 20 years. On the private front, though, a lot of activity has been happening with private developments ending their leases early through an en bloc redevelopment program. So this is entirely voluntary. The owners of a high-rise condominium or low-rise condominium, or even a group of private homeowners who landed properties might vote to sell to a developer after checking that the master plan allows, for example, for higher development to take place. And developers will bid to buy that site, and a successful bidder will then apply to the URA to develop new housing on fringe 99-year leases. And the URA, when approving that application, will also factor in the development charges that have to be paid to the government for the increase in density and change in use. The process might again take a few years. So these are examples of en bloc details that has taken place, the ones that are higher values at least. So most of the references that I have used in my presentation can be found in book Policy Innovations for Affordable Housing in Singapore, such as the various tables I've shown. And they are also available for the HDB details. You can download the HDB annual report from its website, and the master plan is available from the URA website. So I've come to the end of my presentation, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
All right. Well, if that is it, thank you very much, Professor. We really appreciate you taking the time early in the morning in Singapore to join all of us.
It's a delight to join you. I wish you all the best with your housing programs.